Look down at yourself right now. That tiny act of decorating a human body may be older than our own species. A ring, a logo on your shirt, an earring, painted nails, a bracelet, a watch. Every one of them is you telling strangers who you are without saying a single word. It feels modern. It feels a little like vanity. It's neither. Wearing meaning on your body is older than farming, older than writing, older than the first cave painting. Another kind of human was wearing it too, long before we ever met them. Let's clear away the obvious assumption, because it's the thing standing in your way. When we hear the word jewelry, we think luxury, decoration, something frivolous you add once the serious business of survival is handled. Beads are just pretty, right? Wrong, and understanding why is the whole story. Think about what a single shell bead actually requires. You have to see a shell not as a shell, but as a symbol, a thing that stands for something else. You have to drill it, thread it, and wear it where other people will see it. And crucially, the people looking at it have to already know what it means. A bead is a message that only works if a whole group shares the code. That is displaced symbolic thought, the same mental machinery that sits underneath language itself. So a pierced shell is not a trinket. It is a fossil of the imagination. Find one, and you have found a mind that thinks like yours. A bead can say things a body alone cannot. I am married. I am the child of a chief. I have killed a lion. I belong to the people of the river, not the people of the hills. Cave art tells you a person could imagine a world. A bead tells you they had begun to imagine themselves, and wanted you to see it too. Before the first bead, though, there was color. The oldest hint that humans decorated their bodies at all is ochre, that same red iron oxide pigment, and it reaches back staggeringly far. Across Africa, people were collecting and grinding ochre by 300,000 years ago, and using it habitually by 160,000. Now, we can't always prove what the red was for. Some of it tanned hides or glued stone tools into handles. But ground ochre turns up again and again on bodies, on objects, and beside the dead, and the simplest reading is that it is the oldest cosmetic in the world. Paint came first. Then, at some point, someone turned the idea of decoration into a thing you could keep, thread, and hand down. A bead. So how far back do the beads go? Further than almost anyone predicted. Travel to western Morocco, to Bizmoune Cave, set in the flank of a limestone mountain, about 12 kilometers from the Atlantic. Between 2014 and 2018, archaeologists dug out 33 tiny sea snail shells, a species called Tritia gibbosula, each one deliberately pierced with a hole. In 2021, a team including the archaeologists Stephen Kuhn and Abdeljalil Bouzouggar published the dating in Science Advances, and the number stopped people cold. At least 142,000 years old. These are, as of now, the oldest known pieces of jewelry on Earth. Worn on cords, rubbed smooth with use, some stained with red ochre, by people living almost 150,000 years ago. And these beads did something that should make you pause. They traveled. At school in what is now Israel, and Oued Jabana in Algeria, researchers found the same kind of Nassarius shell beads, dated to somewhere between 100,000 and 135,000 years old. That work was published by Marian Vanhaeren Francesco and colleagues in Science in 2006. And here is the detail that matters. Oued Jabana sits nearly 200 kilometers from the sea. Those shells did not wash up there. Somebody chose them on a distant beach and carried them, over days of walking, for no reason except that they mattered. You do not haul a useless object 200 kilometers. You haul it because it means something to you. And that changes what the object is. A shell carried that far is no longer just a shell. It has become a thing worth carrying, which is another way of saying it has become a symbol. The distance itself is the proof. Push forward to 75,000 years ago, and the picture gets sharper. We are back at Blombos Cave in South Africa, the same site that holds the oldest known drawing. In its layers, Francesco and Christopher Henshilwood recovered dozens of shell beads made from a little scavenging sea snail, Nassarius kraussianus. And under the microscope, they could read how the beads had been worn. The shells had rubbed against each other and against cord and skin, polishing flat facets exactly where beads on a string grind together. These weren't loose shells. They were strung, arranged, worn as a set, and dusted with ochre. 75,000 years ago, someone sat down and threaded a necklace with a design in mind. A few thousand years later, and a few hundred kilometers north, at Tafaralt in Morocco, there are more, around 82,000 years old, published by Abdeljalil Bouzouggar and colleagues in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2007. This is not a single lucky find. This is a habit, spread across a continent. And notice what makes a bead such powerful evidence in the first place. A cave painting stays on the wall. You have to travel to it. A bead travels with you. It rides on the living body, through camps and gatherings and confrontations, doing its quiet work in front of other people every single day. That is the entire point of it. So when an archaeologist lifts a drilled shell out of a layer of ancient dirt, they are not just holding an object. They are holding the moment a person decided that how they appeared to others was worth real time and effort to control. That decision, more than almost anything else we can dig up, is the fingerprint of a mind like ours. Then humans did something even more revealing. They stopped relying on found shells at all. A shell bead is limited. You take what the beach happens to give you. But somewhere in Africa, people began making ostrich-eggshell beads from scratch. You crack the shell, chip it into rough discs, bore a hole through each one, string a whole line of them, and then grind the entire strand down at once until every bead matches. That is a leap. You are no longer finding an ornament. You are manufacturing one to a standard, which means you carry a mental template of the perfect bead, a shared idea of correct, before you make a single one. These are the world's oldest fully manufactured ornaments, objects with no natural shape left in them at all. In 2021, a study in Nature led by Jennifer Miller and Yiming Wang traced these beads across the continent and found something astonishing. Between roughly 50 and 33,000 years ago, groups more than 3,000 kilometers apart were making beads to the same specifications. The same style, spread across a distance the size of a continent, from eastern Africa down to sites like Blombos Cave in the south. It was, in effect, the oldest social network we can detect, a web of alliances and shared identity, held together by beads passed hand to hand across thousands of kilometers. And at Diepkloof, some of those eggshells were even engraved with matching patterns. 60,000 years ago, the same design turning up again and again, the way a logo does. Now for the discovery that breaks the human monopoly on all of this. Go to Krapina, in Croatia, a Neanderthal site first excavated back in 1899. For over a century, its boxes of bones sat in a museum in Zagreb. Then the curator, Davorka Radovčić, went back through them and noticed something everyone else had missed. 8 talons from white-tailed eagles, from at least 3 different birds, bring cut marks, polish, and little notches, exactly as if they had been strung together and worn against each other. In 2015, she and her colleagues published them in the journal PLOS ONE. Their age? Around 130,000 years old. Let that settle for a second. Roughly 130,000 years ago, tens of thousands of years before modern humans ever set foot in Europe, a Neanderthal assembled a necklace of eagle claws. And think about what that took. White-tailed eagles are enormous, powerful, dangerous birds. Those 8 talons came from at least 3 separate animals, which means the claws were gathered and kept over time, then curated into a single ornament. Nobody wears eagle talons by accident. It is a statement, a hard-won, deliberate display. Not for warmth, not for food, for meaning. And it was not a fluke. In a Spanish cave called Cueva de los Aviones, a team led by Dirk Hoffman found perforated, pigment-stained seashells, along with containers holding mixed mineral colorants, dated to around 115,000 years ago, and published in Science Advances in 2018. Neanderthals. Piercing and painting shells, more than 100,000 years ago. The species we spent a century dismissing as a brutish evolutionary dead end was making jewelry before we ever showed up. And if 2 different human species both decorated their bodies, then the impulse is not a quirk of our lineage. It may be part of the deeper inheritance of being human at all. Through every one of these stories runs the same thread, literally red, ochre. On the Bizmoune beads, on the Blombos necklace, inside the Aviones shells. The same pigment used to draw on cave walls was used to paint skin and stain ornaments. Body and object, colored together, so that a person did not just carry a symbol, they became one. Which brings us to the reframe that changes what all of this means. We think of a necklace as decoration, but look at how these beads actually behave, and something else comes into focus. In 2006, Vanhaeren and Davorka mapped the types of beads worn across Ice Age Europe, and they found that different regions wore different, consistent styles. So consistent that the bead types cluster into distinct zones, lining up with what look like separate ethnic or linguistic groups. In other words, the beads worked like flags, like badges, like accents you could see from across a valley. What you wore announced which people you belonged to, before you were ever close enough to speak. That is not decoration. That is identity, worn on the skin. It is the original social media, running for more than 100,000 years before anyone typed a single word. Let's lay the timeline out. 142,000 years ago, someone in Morocco is drilling sea snails into beads. 130,000 years ago, a Neanderthal in Croatia strings eagle claws. 115,000 years ago, Neanderthals in Spain are staining shells with pigment. Between 135 and 100,000 years ago, beads are being carried hundreds of kilometers inland from the sea. 75,000 years ago, a necklace is threaded at Blombos, and by 50,000 years ago, matching beads bind together a social network spanning a continent. So reach up and touch whatever you happen to be wearing right now. The ring, the chain, the earring, the little logo over your heart. You are doing something 142,000 years old. You are taking an object, filling it with meaning, and wearing that meaning where others can read it. Every human society ever studied does this. Not one has ever been found without it. The urge to say who you are without speaking is not a modern indulgence. It is one of the first things that made us us, and it may be older than us entirely. You were never just getting dressed. You were writing a sentence on your own body, in a language your species has been speaking since before it could speak. All the research is linked in the description.